The wine glass tilted at exactly 9:12 p.m. 300 of the most powerful people in America watched red Cabernet pour over a stranger's head, and nobody moved, not the Pentagon officials at his table, not the tech billionaires with their phones already raised, not the woman holding the empty glass, smiling like she'd just won something. Did you really think you belonged here? Her voice carried across the frozen ballroom, satisfied, certain, the voice of a woman who had never once been told no. But the man dripping wine onto a white tablecloth didn't flinch, didn't shout. He pulled out a folded handkerchief and cleaned his face slowly, precisely like a man who had all the time in the world. Then he looked at the colonel beside him and said 6 words. I think we have everything we need. By sunrise, a billion-dollar empire had started to burn. She just didn't know it yet. Some mistakes happen in slow motion. You see them coming, you watch them build, you feel the air change right before they land, and you still can't stop them. This is one of those stories. But before we get to the wine, and we will get to the wine, you need to understand something about a Tuesday morning in October. 3 weeks before everything fell apart, because that's where this actually started. Not at a gala, not in a ballroom, in a kitchen, with a folded napkin. The Hartwell house in Pasadena had 11 rooms. Vivian used 4 of them regularly. The kitchen she never cooked in. The dining room she never ate breakfast in. The sitting room she approved of but never sat in. And her dressing room, the only room in that house that ever truly felt like hers. Everything else was Hartwell. The architecture was Hartwell. The furniture was Hartwell. The oil portraits lining the upstairs hallway, 3 generations of square-jawed men who looked like they'd been born in suits, were very much Hartwell. Vivian had married into this house at 26. She was 52 now, which meant she had spent 26 years learning to fit inside rooms that were built before she existed. She had gotten very good at it. That Tuesday morning, she stood at the far end of the kitchen in a silk robe, watching Rosa fold napkins at the breakfast table. Rosa had worked for the Hartwells for 9 years. She folds the napkins the way she always did. Crisp, clean, a precise diagonal. Set each one down gently. Same fold every time, for 9 years. Vivian watched for 45 seconds. Then she set down the glass she was holding and walked to the table. Rosa looked up, immediately careful. The way people look when they've learned that their name said in a certain tone means something is coming. That fold. Vivian picked up one napkin, examined it, turned it once. Where did you learn this? The same way I always. It's not right. She demonstrated. Set the napkin back. The point goes down, not to the side. She looked at Rosa directly. Please do them again. She walked out. 9 years. Same fold. Never a problem before. That morning, for a reason Vivian could not name and did not try to, it was a problem. She didn't think about it on the drive to her lunch meeting. Didn't think about it over the seating chart she approved with 2 twin women from a charity board. Didn't think about it that evening when Desmond came home looking like a man who'd been slowly deflating all day and poured himself something stronger than his usual. She wasn't cruel. That's what she would have told you. She just had standards. Desmond Hartwell had spent 31 years running a company his grandfather built and his father expanded and his older brother decided he didn't want. So it came to Desmond. Hartwell Defense Group built components, guidance systems, precision parts for things that needed to be precise or people died. The Pentagon had been a client since 1957. 3 generations of Hartwells had shaken hands in those hallways and come home with contracts and a particular kind of satisfaction that comes from being necessary to powerful people. But the last 18 months had been different. Desmond sat that Tuesday evening in his study, 3 folders spread in front of him on the desk. 3 contracts. Lost. Not because their work was bad, their work had always been excellent. The problem was the Pentagon was changing what it wanted. Younger contractors, smaller, faster, companies built by people who grew up thinking differently about defense, about technology, about who got to sit at what table. Hartwell Defense Group was starting to feel like a grandfather clock in a room full of smartphones. 1 contract remained. 1 real opportunity to reset the whole equation. UAV systems, autonomous drone technology, $1.2 billion over 7 years. The kind of contract that doesn't just save a company, it redefines one. The Defense Innovation Unit was running the selection. Their senior evaluator would attend the Tech Horizon Charity Gala in 3 weeks, would observe, assess. Not just the technical proposals. Desmond had been told this specifically, had turned the phrase over in his mind a dozen times since. But the character of potential partners. Character. He poured 2 fingers of bourbon and didn't taste it. The evaluator's name had not been released, just a title. Senior Evaluator, Defense Innovation Unit. He told Vivian that night. walked to the sitting room where she was reviewing something on her tablet, sat across from her, spread his hands on his knees the way he did when he needed her to pay attention. "Friday's Gallus," he said. "The DIU evaluator will be there. We need to make the right impression, not just technically, personally. They're evaluating character." Vivienne looked up. "Who is it?" "They haven't said. What do we know about them?" "Nothing, just that they'll be watching." She nodded, looked back at her tablet. Then, after a moment, "I'm thinking the cobalt dress." It signals authority without aggression. Desmond looked at his hands. He just wanted to say something else. Something about how much was riding on this. Something about needing her to understand that and help him carry it. But Vivian had already moved to the next thing on her screen, already in the next moment, and the gap between what he needed to say and what he knew she would hear felt too wide to cross that evening. So he said nothing. And that nothing, his nothing, not Rosa's, not Portia's, was also, in its own quiet way, part of what built Friday night. Friday arrived the way important evenings always do, too quickly, with the faint sense that you've forgotten something and can't identify what. The Beaumont Ballroom was the kind of room that made people feel either very significant or very small, depending on what they'd walked in carrying. Crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths pressed into submission, flower arrangements that cost more than some people's monthly rent, the soft clink of very good glassware. And underneath all of it, underneath the string quartet and the charity auction displays and the careful laughter, the low hum of ambition, of people deciding things, of money looking for somewhere to land. Vivian arrived at 7:14 p.m. Cobalt dress, hair perfect. The posture of someone who had never once walked into a room wondering if she belonged. Because she never had, not since she became a Hartwell. Desmond was beside her in his charcoal suit, already scanning the room for faces he recognized, already working. He had the quality of a man who treated every room as a problem to be solved. Portia Wynne arrived 2 minutes behind them, in a dress the color of champagne, and immediately positioned herself at Vivienne's left elbow, where she always was, where she had been without interruption for 23 years. "Who do we see first?" Portia asked. "The garrison table," Vivian said, "then the foundation people. Then I want the seating chart before dinner. They moved through the ballroom, they owned it. And honestly, in rooms like this, moving like you own something amounts to nearly the same thing. 7:23 p.m., the champagne situation. Not aggressively warm, not warm enough for most people to notice. But Vivian noticed, and caring followed, noticing the way it always did, automatically, without pause, without question. She stopped a server near the silent auction tables. Young man, maybe 22, white jacket and black bow tie, name tag Eduardo. "This champagne is warm," she said. Eduardo looked at the glass she was holding out. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I can get you a fresh glass from a bottle that's been properly chilled." She smiled, the smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Can you manage that?" Of course. He left. The fresh glass arrived 4 minutes later. Exact same temperature. She drank it without comment. 7:51 p. The valet. Vivian had left her wrap in the car. She sent the attendant, a young man, early 20s, name tag she didn't read, to retrieve it. He came back with the wrap in a pleasant manner, and the misfortune of existing in a moment when Vivian was calculating table distances and half-licenses and feeling the particular irritability in an important situation she cannot fully control. "Did you drive it?" she asked. "The car. When you pulled in, he blinked." "Yes, ma'am, I drove it." "You have a license." "Now, quite a question?" The grammatical equivalent of an eyebrow raised in doubt. The young man held her gaze. "Yes, ma'am, I do." "Good." She took the wrap, walked away. Portia fell into step beside her. Said nothing. Said absolutely nothing. And that practiced 23 years silence told the young man with the license and the bow tie everything he needed to know about whether what had just happened was acceptable. Because nobody said as otherwise. 8:15 p.m. This one was different. A woman approached near the bar, 40, maybe 42, beautifully dressed. The kind of composed that isn't performing composure, that actually has it. She extended her hand and began to introduce herself, and Vivian was already looking past her, scanning for Desmond, before the woman finished her own name. "I think the foundation offices are on the 3rd floor, Vivian said. "If you're here about the community grant applications." The woman paused, hand still extended. She lowered it slowly. "I'm not here about the grants." A beat, steady voice. "I'm Miriam Okafor, Vantage Aero Systems." Vivian looked at her then, really looked. Something flickered, a recognition she couldn't place. Ah, she smiled. Wonderful work in the commercial sector. Miriam held her gaze 1 second longer than comfortable, then smiled back, the smile of a woman who had weathered this exact kind of thing before and learned to move through it without breaking stride. Enjoy your evening, Miriam said. She walked away. Portia was still beside Vivian, still saying nothing. Later, much later, in the specific awful clarity of hindsight, Vivian would learn that Miriam Okafor's company was valued at $800 million, that the Pentagon had awarded Vantage Aero 2 contracts in the past year, that General Aldrich Monroe considered Miriam one of the most capable executives in the entire defense technology sector. But that was later. Right now, Vivian was already looking for Desmond. 8:47 p.m. He walked in without announcement, no entourage. No one clearing a path. Just a man in a navy suit. Not showy, not plain. The exact suit you choose when you want to be taken seriously, without being loud about it. Who moved through the doorway of the Beaumont Grand Ballroom with the posture of someone who had once carried 40 pounds of combat equipment and still carried the memory of it in his spine. General Aldrich Monroe, though no one had announced that name, he crossed the ballroom at a steady pace, not slow, not rushed, the pace of someone who arrived exactly when they meant to. 3 men at table 14. Pentagon adjacent by their bearing, the particular kind of stillness that comes from years of a certain discipline, registered his presence and stood. Not all the way, just enough. The way you rise for someone above you in a hierarchy you take seriously. The most senior of the three extended his hand and waited for Monroe to reach him and shook the hand Monroe offered and sat down after Monroe sat ass after. This happened about 12 seconds, in the middle of a crowded ballroom. Almost no one saw it. Vivian didn't see it. She was taking a photograph with Portia near the silent auction wall. Their cheeks pressed together, both smiling the smiles they'd practiced. The shutter clicked. Monroe sat down at table 14. The conversation began. It was Portia who noticed most of him first, actually. 20 minutes later, they'd drifted toward the east wall, and Portia had been doing what she always did, cataloging, sorting, filing faces against names, against degrees of importance. "Who's that?" she asked. Vivian didn't look up immediately. "Who's what?" "Table 14, Navy suit. He's been talking to the Pentagon group for 20 minutes. Vivian looked. She took in the table, the serious conversation. The cards exchanged. The way everyone at that table leaned slightly toward the man in the Navy suit when he spoke. She didn't know him, and yet he looked, and this was the word, though she wouldn't have chosen it, settled. The way people look when they are exactly where they belong. He wasn't working the room. The room was arranged around him. Something moved in her chest. Something small and old and tight. The particular feeling she got when something wasn't the way it should be, and she couldn't immediately explain why. "Find out who he is," Vivian said. Then, "No, I'll find out myself." She should not have gone over there. She knew that, later. There was a voice, not loud, not insistent, but present, that said simply, "Leave it." She didn't leave it. Here is what she was thinking as she crossed the ballroom toward table 14. "He doesn't belong here. Someone should check this. I'm doing this for the right reasons," which is what people always tell themselves just before they do the wrong thing for deeply personal ones. She was 20 feet from the table when she recognized Colonel Renata Osi. Osi was sitting at table 14. This required an uncomfortable recalculation. Osi had joined the Hartwell Defense Group board 4 months ago. She was precise in meetings. She had a way of looking at you that suggested she had assessed far more dangerous things than the boardroom presentation, and found this considerably easier. Vivian had always filed Osi under fine but not important. Osi looked up, saw Vivian coming. Her expression shifted, a controlled alarm, the look of someone watching two things converge that she cannot stop. She started to stand, started to intercept. Vivian was already at the table. "Excuse me." She said it pleasantly, the voice she used when about to say something unpleasant in a pleasant way. 5 faces looked up. 3 Pentagon officials, Osei, and the man in the Navy suit. His eyes were dark and still. The kind of still that doesn't mean nothing is happening. It means a great deal is happening, and none of it is for you to see. "I'm Vivian Hartwell. Smile. Hartwell Defense Group. We've been a Pentagon partner for 7 years." Curtis acknowledgement from the table. I couldn't help noticing. She looked at Monroe directly. There seems to have been some confusion with the seating arrangements. The VIP section is typically reserved for established defense contractors and senior leadership. A calibrated pause. Not attendees who may have come through other channels. Vivienne. Osi's voice was low and exact. "Perhaps, I'm sure Renata appreciates the concern." Vivian didn't look at her. "I just think someone should clarify." "May I ask," Monroe said. Calm, no inflection, the voice of a man who has been in rooms that were genuinely dangerous and found this mildly instructed by comparison. "What channels you believe I came through?" Vivienne tilted her head. The Defense Innovation Unit extended the invitation. "I understand that. but I'm wondering what capacity you're here in. Which program? Which initiative?
I'm here, Monroe said. As the senior evaluator, the words landed quietly. Senior evaluator.
Vivienne processed this, followed it, came to the wrong conclusion. I said a smile, and you're evaluating the community outreach component? The diversity initiatives? Somewhere to her left, Portia made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Osei had gone very still. One of the Pentagon officials was studying the tablecloth. Monroe looked at Vivienne with an attention she mistook for engagement. It was something closer to documentation. I'm evaluating, he said. She laughed. Not cruel, exactly. The laugh of someone genuinely amused by an answer they find absurd. Everything. She returned the word like something that didn't look right. Based on what qualifications? Which brings me to my original point. I think there may be a misunderstanding about how these evaluations actually. Vivienne, Osei stood. Let me introduce you properly. Renata, I appreciate it, but this is fairly straightforward. His names, Osei said with a precision that could cut glass, is General Aldrich Monroe. Vivienne stopped. General. She looked at Monroe. He was watching her the way you watch something that has just decided its own fate without knowing it. And, Osei continued, with the measured tone of a woman who has decided if this ship is going down, she will at least name the iceberg. He personally approves every major defense contract awarded by the Defense Innovation Unit, including the UAV initiative your company is pursuing. Silence. The kind that fills a space completely. Vivienne's mouth opened. Something was recalibrating. Some internal system registering an error, searching for a correction, finding none. And then, because she had built her entire adult life around never backing down, never giving an inch to anyone she had already decided was beneath her, because 26 years of being a Hartwell had given her armor but not wisdom, and old armor tightens when threatened. She did not stop. She escalated. I don't care, she said, and her voice had taken on something new, something that had stopped being social performance and become the real thing underneath it. What title anyone's has assigned. I care about qualifications. I care about merit. I care about companies like mine that have given 70 years to this country not being pushed aside by. She stopped, and in that stop, something old swung open. A door she had kept closed her whole adult life, opening now in a moment of unguarded fury. By people who weren't supposed to be here. She picked up her wine glass. She was not fully aware she had done it. The glass tilted. Red wine, a good Cabernet properly decanted, 40 minutes open, poured in a long, smooth arc over the top of Merceau's head, down the side of his face, across his collar and lapel and tie, spreading through the weave of his suit jacket in the irreversible way that red wine spreads through tight fabric, the way that cannot be undone. Only grown around, silence, complete and total silence. Every fork stopped midway to every mouth, every conversation extinguished, every phone in the room, and there were many because this was a room full of people who documented everything, lifted. Vivienne set the empty glass down on the tablecloth. She heard the sound it made, small, clean. Final. Did you really think? She said, and her voice was controlled now, satisfied, the voice of someone who has done what they came to do, that you belonged here. Monroe did not answer immediately. He reached into his jacket pocket, produced a folded white handkerchief, the kind a man carries as a matter of course, not affectation, unfolded it with deliberate, unhurried hands, and began to clean the wine from his face, methodically, as though this were a minor inconvenience on an otherwise ordinary evening. He did not look angry, did not look humiliated. He looked like someone who had just received information he expected and was now deciding what to do with it. He looked at Osei. Colonel. His voice was low. I think we have everything we need. He folded the handkerchief, put it back in his pocket, stood up, and walked away from the table without looking at Vivienne again. Through the silent ballroom, past the frozen guests and the lifted phones and the string quartet that had stopped mid-phrase. Through the door, gone, the room came back to itself slowly, like waking from something. First the murmurs, then the conversations hushed and urgent. Then 300 Pulsi Santé, exhaling and reaching for their drinks and turning to the person beside them to say, did you see that? And did she just, and who was that man? Vivienne stood at table 14. She felt still the warmth of certainty, the particular satisfaction of action taken. She was waiting, still waiting, for the room to confirm that she had done something correct. The room was not confirming this. The Pentagon officials were looking at her the way people looks at something they cannot quite categorize because the category is too alarming to name out loud. The tech executives at nearby tables had the expressions of people who have witnessed a car accident and are still processing whether to call someone. Osei had sat back down. She was looking at the tablecloth. Her hand was on her phone. Portia peered at Vivienne's shoulder. Vivienne, her voice barely existed. We should go. Let them look. Vivienne smoothed the front of her dress. Someone had to say it. Vivienne, I'm going to find Desmond. She turned. Walked back across the ballroom the way she'd walked in. Chin up, posture perfect. The posture of someone who has never once wondered if she belonged. The difference was, this time, everyone was watching, and not one of them had the expression she expected. Desmond found her first. He came through the crowd with the look of a man moving toward a house fire, color completely gone from his face. What did you do? Not a question. What needed to be done? She straightened her earring. That man had no business. Vivienne. He took her arm. Gently, but with the grip of someone holding something they're afraid of dropping. Tell me you know who that was. I don't care who. His name is General Aldrich Monroe. Desmond's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, the kind of whisper that carries more weight than a shout. He runs the Defense Innovation Unit. She stopped. He was the evaluator tonight, Vivienne. He was evaluating us. The ballroom continued around them. Glasses clinked. Voices murmured. Somewhere across the room, a phone screen glowed with the video already playing back, and then another screen, and then another. Vivienne heard a sound from very far away, or maybe she was the one who had gone very far away. She couldn't tell. He was evaluating us, Desmond said again. Soft this time. The floor did not literally disappear beneath her feet. It just felt that way. In the car, Desmond checked his phone. Didn't show her the screen. She asked once, twice. Third time he handed it over. The video had 62,000 views. 62,000. In 38 minutes, she watched herself pour the wine. From the outside, for the first time, watched her own face, that satisfaction, that certainty, that absolute conviction, and felt something she hadn't felt in decades. She felt small, but small was dangerous. Small was the feeling she had arrived in this marriage with, the feeling she had spent 26 years building armor over, and old armor is harder than new armor. The first thing old armor does when threatened is tighten, so it tightened. I didn't know who he was, she said. I know. If I had known, Vivienne, Desmond's kept his eyes on the road. I need you to not say anything else tonight. I need you to think before you say anything else about this to anyone. She looked out the window. The city lights passed. Clean and indifferent. She thought about Monroe's hands, steady, unhurried, folding the handkerchief without any hurry at all. She thought about his face when he stood up to leave. Not angry, not humiliated, confirmed. Like she had answered a question he already knew the answer to. At 11:30 p.m., she sat at her dressing table in the room that had always been the most hers in the house. Mirror in front of her. Makeup she hadn't removed yet. The woman looking back at her wearing the Colbert dress that signals authority without aggression. She thought about what Desmond said, thought about the video, thought about the number. 62,000. Then she picked up her phone, opened Instagram, and typed. Standing up for what's right isn't always comfortable. Real Americans shouldn't have to apologize for defending our values and our institutions. No apology, truth matters. She looked at it for a moment, posted it, set the phone face down on the table, went to bed, did not sleep. And somewhere across the city, in a different kind of room with different kinds of pressures and a stained white handkerchief folded on his desk, General Aldrich Monroe drafted a memo that would change the way the federal government chose its partners. He didn't write Vivienne's name anywhere in it. He didn't need to. She had already written it herself. In red wine, in a ballroom full of cameras, in permanent ink. Saturday morning arrived the way bad news always does, without asking, without warning, just as bright and merciless, and already fully formed when Vivienne opened her eyes at 6:14 a.m. She lay still for a moment, ceiling above her, white. The same ceiling she had looked at for 26 years. Familiar in the way things become familiar when you stop actually seeing them. Desmond's side of the bed was empty and cold. He hadn't slept beside her. She knew that without checking, had heard him moving through the house at 2 a.m., then again at 4, the particular sound of a man circling a problem that won't sit still. Her phone was on the nightstand. She looked at it. Didn't touch it yet. Looked at the ceiling again. Then picked it up. 419 notifications since last night. Since the post she'd written at the dressing table in the cobalt dress, which it seems, at 11:30 p.m. in the quiet of that room, like a reasonable thing to say. Clear. Principled. The statement of a person who has decided to stand behind her actions. She scrolled and stopped. The comments were not what she expected, which is a mild way of saying they were the opposite of what she expected, which is itself a mild way of saying she read the first 50 of them and then put the phone face down on the duvet and sat with her hands in her lap like a woman who has touched something hot and is waiting to understand how badly she's burned. The video had 2.3 million views. 2.3 million. At 6:22 on a Saturday morning, she picked the phone back up, found the video, watched it again herself, from outside herself for the second time. The first time she'd watched it in the car and felt small and the armor had tightened. This time she watched it and felt something she didn't have a clean word for. Something related to, but not quite fear. More like the physical sensation of standing on a floor that looked solid and discovering a soft spot directly under your feet. She put the phone down, picked it up again, opened Instagram, her post. 4,000 comments now, growing while she watched, the number ticking upward in real time like a meter running on something expensive. She did not read them. She already knew, so she did what she had done her entire adult life when the world pushed back. She called someone who would agree with her. The podcast was called American Values Today. The host, a man named Grant Bellamy, had a following of roughly 400,000. He had interviewed her twice before on topics she could no longer remember, but felt certain she had handled well. He answered on the second ring, Vivian Hartwell. His voice was warm with the warmth of someone whose ratings were about to improve significantly. I was hoping you'd call. I'd like to come in this morning. We can go live at 9. Good, a pause. I want to set the record straight. Of course. His pause had texture, the quiet of a man choosing not to say what he's actually thinking. We'll give you all the time you need. She hung up, got dressed, applied her makeup with the focused precision of someone preparing for something she's already decided she will win. Downstairs, Desmond sat at his desk in the study, not the kitchen, not the island, the desk where he went when things were serious, with his laptop open and the expression of a man who has been reading things he cannot unread. He looked up when she appeared in the doorway, took in the blazer, the purposeful shoes, the set of her jaw. Where are you going? American Values Today. 9 a.m. Silence. The kind with weight. I'm going to explain what actually happened. Vivian, something to in his voice. Not management, not strategy. Something raw. Genuine fear, the fear of a man watching the last chance for something slip past. Please, I am asking you, do not do this. She picked up her keys from the hall table. Someone has to say it, Desmond. She left. He didn't follow. He sat at his desk instead and opened a different window on his laptop. Then picked up the phone and called his assistant, woke her up, gave her one instruction. Get me everything you can find on General Aldrich Monroe, public records, employment history, anything that isn't classified. I need it before noon. He hung up. The pre-market numbers for Hartwell Defense Group were already populating on his screen, down 11%. He watched the number. It moved to 12. Here is what Vivian said on American Values Today at 9 a.m. on a Saturday morning in October. She said she had every right to question who was sitting at that table. She said merit mattered more than appearances. She said that politically motivated diversity programs were eroding the standards that had made American industry great. She said that real American companies built by real American families over real American generations should not have to apologize for expecting those standards to be upheld. She said she would do it again. Grant Bellamy nodded throughout. His ratings, Vivian did not know, tripled during the broadcast. CNN picked up the clip at 9:46 a.m. Fox News ran it at 10:15. By noon, her face was on the front page of every major news website in the country. By noon, Hartwell Defense Group stock had fallen 22%. By noon, Desmond had received calls from 3 board members, 2 major clients, and his brother in Vermont who said only Des. What is happening? Desmond's assistant called at 10:30. Sir, a pause that had weather in it. I have the report on General Monroe. Send it. I did, but the pause again. I think you should know before you open it. It's 2 pages. Desmond frowned. 2 pages for a man of his position. Yes, sir. Carefully, it's 2 pages because the rest is classified. He understood what she meant without her saying it further. He opened the report. West Point, class of 1994, top of his cohort. 2 combat deployments in the Middle East. Specific locations and dates listed as classified. Multiple decorations, several names classified. Current position, Director, Defense Innovation Unit. Annual Budget Authority, $49.8 billion. After that, blank. No social media presence of any kind. No public speeches after 2019. No photographs beyond the official military portrait, the kind where the decorations across the chest are so numerous they stop looking like individual honors and start looking like a landscape. 2 pages. Desmond sat with it. Then he called Colonel Renata Osei. She answered immediately, like she'd been waiting. Desmond, tell me what I'm dealing with. A pause, the pause of someone deciding how much of the truth to bring, then deciding all of it. He was my commanding officer, she said. 2009. I won't tell you where because you don't need to know. What I'll tell you is that he decisions under conditions that would have broken most people, and the decisions he made were right, and people are alive today because of them. She paused. He's the most methodical human being I have ever encountered. Everything he does is deliberate. Every room he walks into, every conversation he has, every decision he makes, all of it is deliberate. Her voice dropped slightly. His being at that gala without identifying himself was not an accident, Desmond. He was watching. He was assessing. And Vivienne gave him more information in 10 minutes than 6 months of background research could have provided. A breath. I need to tell you something else. Something I wasn't sure I was permitted to say. But given what's unfolding, tell me. The DIU has been conducting a cultural sense of Hartwell Defense Group's January. Employment practices, retention data, HR complaint records, standard procedure for major contract candidates. And the results were, she stopped, chose the word, concerning. 3 discrimination complaints in 5 years. 2 settled quietly. One that went further than it should have before it was contained. Your minority employee retention rate is 31%. The industry average is 54. The study was very quiet. Last night, OC said, wasn't the beginning of the problem. It was the confirmation. Desmond set down his pen. He wants to meet, OC said. Monroe, today, 2 p.m. Federal Building, downtown, just you. After he hung up, Desmond sat for a long moment at his desk. He thought about his grandfather, who had started this company with 2 contracts and a handshake, and the absolute conviction that if you built something good and stood behind it, the rest would follow. He thought about his father, who had expanded it and who used to say that reputation was the only asset that couldn't be manufactured. He thought about January, about the cultural assessment that had been running since January, about 31%. He thought about all the things he had noticed over the years and filed under not my department or HR handled it or isolated incidents. He thought about how long a thing can be true before you decide to see it. Then he picked up his keys and drove himself to the Federal Building. The meeting room had no windows. Not unusual. Many federal meeting rooms have no windows. But this one felt particularly sealed. The air recycled and controlled, the lighting flat and institutional, the table long and clean and empty except for 2 folders and a glass of water that no one touched. Monroe was already there when Desmond arrived. Full dress uniform, 4 stars on each shoulder. The decorations across his chest that Desmond had seen as blurs in the ballroom were now specific and close. Distinguished Service Cross, Silver Star, 2 Bronze Stars, and others whose names Desmond did not know but recognized as significant by the way they were arranged. The official portrait on the 2-page report had not conveyed the weight of the actual man. The man in the portrait looked like a title. The man at this table looked like someone who had earned every word of it. 2 other people in the room, a woman from the Secretary of Defense's liaison's office, a man from DIU Legal. Both of them with the quiet stillness of people who are present to witness, not to participate. Monroe gestured to the chair across from him. Desmond sat. Mr. Hartwell. Monroe's voice was the same as it had been at the ballroom, measured, unhurried, carrying no residue of Friday night anywhere in it. Thank you for coming. General, I need to start by. There'll be time. Monroe opened the first folder, set it on the table between them, turned it so Desmond could read it. I'd like you to look at this first. The folder was labeled Hartwell Defense Group, Honocultural Assessment, January through September. Desmond did not touch it. He read from where he sat. We began this review in January, Monroe said. Every major contract candidate goes through it. Employment demographics, retention patterns, complaint records. Exit interview data from employees who left voluntarily in the past 5 years. He let Desmond read for a moment. Your company has had 3 formal discrimination complaints in 5 years. 2 settled out of court. 1 went to external arbitration and produced a finding of hostile work environment. He paused. You have a minority employee retention rate of 31% against an industry average of 54. In the past 8 years, you have not promoted a single person of color above the director level. The air conditioning hummed. Desmond looked at the numbers. He did not dispute them. He couldn't. I want to be precise about something, Monroe said. He closed the first folder, opened the second set it beside the first. Last night did not disqualify Hartwell Defense Group from this contract. Desmond looked up. This report did. Monroe's voice remained even. Last night confirmed that the report was accurate. Those are different things, and the distinction matters. He paused. The UAV contract was awarded to another firm this morning at 7 a.m. $1.2 billion. 7 years. That decision is final. The room absorbed this. Desmond heard the air conditioning. heard the distant sound of the building around them, the hum of a federal institution that would continue operating regardless of what happened to Hartwell Defense Group. He felt the company rearranging itself in his chest into something smaller and older. General! His voice came out steadier than he expected. My wife does not represent the companies. She represents something, Monroe said. Whether it's official policy or personal conviction or the accumulated culture of decades, I can't determine from one evening. But she represents something that has been present in your organization long enough to produce the numbers in that first folder. And she was comfortable enough in it to display it publicly in front of Pentagon officials without apparent hesitation or concern. He paused. That tells me something about the environment she comes from. Desmond had nothing to say to this, because it was true, and he had known it was true, not loudly, not in the way that demands action, but in the quiet, persistent way things are true when you have decided not to examine them too closely. The complaints that HR handled, the departures that were explained away, the patterns he had noticed and filed and moved past, because there was always something more urgent, and the company he was performing. Nothing had broken yet. Nothing had broken until it broke in front of 300 people and a room full of camera phones. Monroe leaned forward slightly. Mr. Hartwell, I'm going to ask you something and I want an honest answer, not a strategic one. Desmond nodded. When did you first notice this pattern in your organization? The question sat between them. Desmond looked at the folder, at the table, at his own hands, at the hands of a man who had spent 31 years running a company and never quite examined the way you examine something you built yourself. 5 years ago, he said. At least. Monroe nodded once, the nod of a man confirming something he already knew. Then you understand, Monroe said quietly, that this conversation is not about last night. Desmond understood. He understood it the way you understand something that has been true for a long time and has finally run out of room to hide. Monroe closed both folders, pushed his chair back slightly, not standing, just giving the table less authority over the space between them. When he spoke again, his voice had shifted by 1 degree, still precise, but something adjacent to human in it. The voice of a man who has had this conversation many times and has never quite stopped finding it necessary. I enlisted as a private 28 years ago, Monroe said. I was 22. I had been told in ways both direct and indirect by people in positions of authority over my life that my ceiling was somewhere considerably lower than where I wanted to go. I decided those people were wrong. He was quiet for a moment. I have been called every name you can imagine by people who believed the color of my skin told them something definitive about my capabilities. I have been passed over, talked past, tested in ways my peers were not tested, and asked to prove things that were simply assumed about others. He paused. Every single one of those people gave me useful information about their character. I used that information accordingly. He looked at Desmond directly. Your wife gave me information last night. Your company's records gave me information over the past 9 months. I have used both accordingly. Another pause. What you do with what I've told you today, that will be information too. About what kind of man you are when the situation requires a decision that costs something. Desmond drove himself home. He had an hour on the freeway, and he used none of it to call anyone or listen to anything. He drove in silence with the windows up and thought about a number, 31%. He thought about the 31% of people who had come to work for the company his grandfather built and found it hostile enough to leave. He thought about what they had encountered in those hallways and at those meetings and in those rooms where Desmond had never been on a Tuesday morning watching napkins get folded. He thought about 5 years ago, at least. He called his assistant from the parking structure for the Hartwell offices. Get me the list, he said, who left the company in the past 7 years. Anyone has cited, formally, informally, in any format, a discriminatory experiences, or a hostile environment, or feeling like they didn't belong. A pause. That could be a significant list, sir. I know. He turned off on engine. Get it to me by Monday morning. The board meeting had been called for 5 p.m., not by Desmond, by Clifton Hartwell. Clifton was 79 years old and lived in a house in Palm Beach that had a view of the water and a kitchen stocked by someone else and a life organized around the particular pleasures of a man who had worked very hard for a very long time and had decided he had earned the right to stop. He had officially retired from the company 7 years ago, which meant very little in practice because he retained the title of Chairman Emeritus and some passwords for the board emergency notification system and the telephone numbers of every major investor and the unquestioned moral authority of the person who had started the whole thing from nothing. He had watched the video at 8 a.m. Saturday. His housekeeper, a woman named Delia who had worked for him for 14 years, had shown it to him on her phone because she knew him well enough to know he needed to see it from her, rather than from a news alert. He had not said anything for a long time after watching it. Then he had asked Delia for his phone and made 4 calls in sequence. First, his pilot, a chartered flight, wheels up from West Palm Beach by 9:30. Second, Renata Ossi. Third, his personal attorney. Fourth, the board members he trusted most. In that order, businesslike, no drama. The calls of a man who has decided what needs to happen and is now arranging for it to happen. The flight landed at Burbank at 2:15 p.m. A car was waiting. He did not go to Desmond's office when he arrived at Hartwell Defense Group headquarters at 4:40 p.m. He went directly to the boardroom, sat at the head of the table where it sat for 40 years, and waited. Did not go to Desmond's office, went directly to the boardroom. Sat at the head of the table where he had sat for 40 years, and waited. They filed in. Desmond first, then O.C. 3 independent board members. The company's chief legal counsel, the head of HR, who arrived at last and must move to his chair with the careful deliberateness of him walking into something he has been dreading. Vivian came in just after the HR director. She had changed since the morning. Was composed. Chin up, the armor on, and polished, and everything in its place. She took her seat without looking at anyone in particular, opened the leather portfolio she carried to important meetings, clicked her pen. Ready. As though this were an agenda item to be addressed and resolved. And then there was Portia. Portia Wynn sat at the far end of the table, not as a board member. She held no official position. She was there because Vivienne had called her from the podcast studio at 11 a.m. and said, "Come, please, I need someone in that room who is on my side." And Portia had driven over because 23 years of friendship operates on a kind of gravity that takes time to overcome. Portia sat at the end of the table in a chair slightly separated from the others, looked at the surface in front of her, and said nothing. Clifton looked at the room. Let it settle. Then he looked at Vivienne. Just looked. For a long moment, nothing else. The look of an old man reading something painful written in a language he helped create. "Vivienne," he said finally. His voice had not changed in the years she had known him. Still the same, low, unhurried, carrying the particular authority of someone who has never needed volume. "Walk me through what you were thinking." She looked up. "I was by protecting the family name. By pouring wine on a 4-star general. I didn't know who by calling him a monkey." Still the same voice. Precise now. The way old things become precise when they have been used until they have lost every excess. In front of 300 people, on camera, in a room full of Pentagon officials, he let that land, and then by spending the following morning on national media explaining why you were right to do it. Vivienne's pen stopped clicking. Sosie Ace opened a folder, set it in the center of the table. The same cultural assessment report, printed now. Real in the way paper makes things real. "The stock closed down to 31% today," O.C. said. Not accusing, reporting. The voice of a woman who has learned to deliver difficult information without the delivery becoming part of the problem. "We've received formal requests from 4 major clients asking for written assurances about our organizational culture. Boeing has requested a call Monday morning. Lockwood Aerospace canceled next week's negotiations without rescheduling. The EEOC has opened a preliminary inquiry. Standard procedure following public incidents of this nature." She paused. "The UAV contract was awarded to a competitor this morning. $1.2 billion. The legal counsel spoke briefly about exposure, about the discrimination complaint record, about the arbitration finding 5 years ago that had been settled and buried and apparently not addressed in any systemic way." The HR director did not speak. He looked at the table throughout. Clifton let the silence that followed the legal counsel's summary sit for a moment. Then he spoke again, and what he said was not what anyone in that room, including Desmond, who had known his father for 57 years, expected. "When Desmond first told me he wanted to marry you," Clifton said, looking at Vivienne, "I wasn't immediately certain." Something shifted in the room, not because of who you were, he continued. "Because what I was afraid might happen to who you were. I had spent 40 years in an industry that rewards a specific kind of certainty, a willingness to hold your position, to believe that the way things have been done is correct because it has been done that way for a long time, to protect what you have from people who might want a share of it." He looked at his hands on the table, old hands, steady, the hands that had built all of this. "I was good at that, and I taught it, to everyone around me, including you." The boardroom was very quiet. "I taught you that the Hartwell names was something to defend at all costs. I taught you that we had earned our position, and that our position was worth protecting." He paused. I forgot to teach you what we were supposed to have earned for. What it was actually supposed to mean. Vivienne sat very straight. What happened on Friday night, Clifton said, is not entirely your fault. She exhaled, just slightly. But the proportion that is your fault, he continued, is considerable, and it has consequences that I am not able to protect you from, that I should not protect you from, and that I would not protect you from even if I could. He straightened in his chair, the chairman's chair, the one he had built the company from. By the authority I hold as chairman of this board, I am removing Vivienne Hartwell from all positions, formal and informal, associated with Hartwell Defense Group, effective immediately. Her access to company assets and accounts is suspended pending legal review. Clifton, don't. Not unkind. Simply finished. Desmond spoke then. He had been sitting to Clifton's left through all of it, holding something heavy in the particular stillness of someone who has made a decision and is waiting for the moment to deliver it. His voice, when it came, was quiet and without anger. The voice of a man who has thought about this for many hours and arrived somewhere he cannot turn back from. I've filed for divorce, he said. The papers will be served Monday morning. Vivienne turned to look at him. He met her eyes. He did not look away. But he was not looking at her the way a husband looks at a wife. He was looking at her the way you look at a period of your life that you have decided has ended. Desmond, I'm sorry, he said. And he meant it. For what was happening now, and for the years that had led here, for the things he had seen and not named, for the silence that had been its own kind of complicity. Then Portia stood up. No one expected it, including Portia. She stood up at the far end of the table, and her voice when it came was not the voice she used at charity boards and gala seating sustainments. It was something raw, something that had been accumulating weight for a long time and had finally reached the point where the weight was unsustainable. I've been her friend for 23 years, Portia said. She was not looking at Vivienne. She was looking at the middle distance, at nothing specific, at the thing she needed to say and had not found the occasion to say until this moment. I was there on Tuesdays when she spoke to Rosa about the napkins. I was at the gala when she spoke to the server and the valet and Miriam Okafor. She stopped. I was there every time. For 23 years, and I said nothing. I laughed along sometimes because it was easier than saying stop. Because her world was comfortable and I didn't want to not be in it. I'm not innocent in this room. Silence. I resigned from every board position and charitable committee I hold in association with Vivienne Hartwell, effective immediately. She picked up her bag, stood up fully, stopped at the door without turning around. I'm sorry, Viv. Her voice quiet, genuine, the voice of someone who is sorry for multiple things at once. I should have said stop a long time ago. She left. The parking structure at Hartwell Defense Group headquarters had 4 levels. Vivienne's company car, the one she had used for 11 years without once thinking about what it meant to have it, had its credentials suspended at 4:47 p.m. She discovered this when she sat in the driver's seat and the navigation system asked her to re-authenticate with credentials that no longer existed. She sat there, looked at the dashboard, at the screen asking for a password to an account that had belonged to a company that had just removed her from all positions, effective immediately. She had not made her own restaurant reservations in 8 years, had not renewed her own dry cleaning account, or scheduled her own medical appointments, or both dealt with her own insurance, or performed any of the 100 small administrative acts of adult life since she had married into a name that came with people to handle those things. She opened her phone, Uber. The app had logged her out. She had to reset her password. The reset email went to an address she barely used. She found the address, found the email, set the new password, requested a car, 14 minutes to order a ride. The driver arrived and was pleasant and said hello, and she answered in a voice that didn't quite sound like hers. She rode through Los Angeles in the back of a stranger's Camry and watched the city through the window. Ordinary and continuous and completely indifferent to what had just happened to Vivienne Hartwell inside a boardroom on the 14th floor. She thought about Rosa, not about Monroe, not about the board, not even about Desmond's face when he said, I'm sorry. She thought about Rosa, Tuesday morning, the napkins, the fold that had been perfectly acceptable for 9 years. She thought about why that morning had been different. What had been tight in her chest that morning, that a napkin fold became the thing she needed to correct. What she had been afraid of that she converted, without pausing, into authority over someone else. She didn't arrive at a conclusion, but she stayed with the question the entire ride, which was, though she did not recognize it as such, the first time in recent memory she had stayed with an uncomfortable question instead of converting it into a statement. She spent the night at Portia's, Not because Portia had invited her, but because going back to the Hartwell house felt impossible and a hotel felt too public. And Portia, despite everything, when Vivienne called from the Camry and said, "I don't have anywhere to go tonight," said, "Come here." Because 23 years of gravity still operated even now. Even after what had been said in the boardroom. Portia made tea. They sat at the kitchen table. Did not talk about the gala or the board meeting or Monroe or the UAV contract. Portia asked if she had eaten. Vivienne said no. Portia made toast. They ate toast at 11 p.m. in a kitchen that smelled like someone else's ordinary life and did not see anything that mattered, and that was, somehow, what was needed. At midnight, alone in the spare room, Vivienne opened Instagram. Read her post one more time, then deleted it. She knew it wouldn't matter. The screenshot was everywhere. Deleting it now was closing a Bluetooth window after the rain was already inside. She deleted it anyway. Put the phone face down on the nightstand. Lay on her back in an unfamiliar room staring at a ceiling she had never seen before, listening to the sounds of a house that wasn't hers. And somewhere across the city, in a quiet office with the recycled air of a federal building and a stained handkerchief folded on the corner of his desk, General Aldrich Monroe finished his memo and read it once and sent it. He would sleep well. He had learned long ago that the work was the work, and you did it, and then you slept. The rest was not his to carry. 2 weeks after the gala, Vivienne Hartwell signed a lease on a studio apartment on Cordova Street in Pasadena. She did this herself, on her phone, on a rental website she had not visited since 2001. The process took longer than it should have because the platform kept asking her to verify her income. And her income, for the first time in 26 years, was a question she did not have a clean answer to. The apartment was on the 3rd floor, one window facing a parking structure, a kitchen the size of a generous closet, walls the color of old paper. It was the most honest room she had lived in since Ohio. The court order came in the same week as the lease. 200 hours of community service. Meridian Community Shelter, Pasadena. Report to the shelter director. Begin immediately. She read the order twice. Folded it. Put it in the kitchen drawer that held things she wasn't ready to deal with. Left it there for 4 days. Then took it back out and made the call, but because the alternative was additional legal consequences she could not afford, literally and otherwise. So, the parking lot of the Meridian Community Shelter on Marengo Avenue. A Tuesday morning, 2 weeks after everything fell apart, 7:48 a.m. She stood there for 4 minutes before going in, which, for Vivienne Hartwell, was practically a complete unraveling, wearing shoes that were wrong for standing on concrete for 6 hours. Holding a coffee she had made herself in a studio apartment that she had rented with a credit card that was entirely her own. She stood in that parking lot for 4 minutes before going in, which, for Vivienne Hartwell, was practically a complete unraveling. The studio apartment had come first, 2 weeks after the gala, after the papers were served and the house keys were exchanged through lawyers, and the Hartwell house in Pasadena became officially, legally, someone else's problem to inhabit. She had found the apartment herself, on her phone, on a website, using criteria she had to reconstruct from scratch, because she had not rented an apartment since she was 25 years old, and the world of rental listings had changed considerably in the intervening decades. The apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building on Cordova Street. It had one window that faced a parking structure and a kitchen the size of a generous closet and walls the color of old paper. It was the most honest room she had lived in since Hesso. The court order came 3 weeks after the gala. 200 hours of community service. Meridian Community Shelter, Pasadena, beginning immediately. Reporting to the shelter director, she had read the order twice, then folded it, then put it in a drawer and not looked at it for 4 days, then taking it back out and called the number listed and made the appointment because the alternative was additional legal consequences she could not afford, literally and otherwise. So, the parking lot. Tuesday morning, 7:48 a.m., she went in. The shelter occupied a converted church on Marengo Avenue, a building that had been adapted so many times it had lost its original personality and found a different one. Functional and worn and warm in the way that places become warm when a great many people have needed them over a long period of time. The entry hallway smelled of industrial cleaner and something starchy and faintly of coffee that had been sitting on a burner too long. A whiteboard fixed to the wall inside the door with 2 strips of painter's tape read in someone's careful handwriting, "Today we have oatmeal and dignity. Please take both." Vivienne stood in the hallway and read this. Read it again. Did not know what to do with it. The shelter director found her there. Josephine Tate was 44 years old, former middle school science teacher who had pivoted into social services after her school closed during a budget crisis. She had been running Meridian for 3 years. She had the particular quality of someone who has encountered every variety of human being at the door of this specific building and developed, through sheer volume of experience, an immediate and comprehensive read on all of them. She looked at Vivian for approximately 4 seconds, then handed her a folded apron and a pair of blue nitrile gloves. "Kitchen," Josephine said. 600 meals by noon, oatmeal for breakfast service, soup for lunch. Ladles are on the left hook. The big pot has a hot spot on the side. Keep the spoon moving or it burns. Vivienne looked at the apron. It had been washed so many times it had faded from whatever original color it started as into a general beige. There was a small brown stain near the pocket that was not coming out. It had the particular softness of something that had been used for a long time by people who needed it. Is there typically some kind of orientation? The orientation is, people are hungry. Josephine was already turning back toward the interior hallway. Kitchen is that way. She left. Vivian stood in the entryway holding the apron. Then she put it on. Found the kitchen. Began. The morning was not cinematic. There was no breakthrough moment, no tearful realization over an industrial oatmeal pot, no exchange of meaningful glances with someone whose life had context she had been ignoring. There were just 600 portions and a left hook for the ladles and a hot spot on the right side, a big pot that she forgot about twice before she stopped forgetting. Her shoulder started aching at 9:15 a.m. She did not mention this to anyone. At 11:40, during the transition between breakfast and lunch service, she sat on a folding chair near the end of the service counter and drank water from a paper cup and looked at the middle distance with the expression of someone recalibrating every assumption they held about how difficult it is to do physical work for 4 hours. That was when she noticed Jerome Adkins, 67 years old, medium height, the build of a man who had once been broader and had redistributed over the decades. Gray at the temples and in his close-cut beard. A way of moving that was completely without waste. No extra motion, no adjustment after placement, every action landing exactly where it was aimed. He was setting up chairs for lunch service, carrying 2 at a time, setting them down with precision. His left hand doing the primary work, because his right hand was missing the index to just below the second knuckle. A clean absence, long healed, incorporated so completely into the way he moved that it registered only if you were paying specific attention. He worked without looking at his hands, the way people work around a fact they have long since finished being surprised by. Vivian noticed. Looked away, noticed again. Jerome caught her looking. Not unkindly. He tilted his head slightly. The look of a man who has been looked at this way before and decided the most efficient response is direct acknowledgement. "Sorry," Vivian said. "People, look." He set down another pair of chairs. "It's fine." She should have left it there. Should have gone back to her paper cup and her recalibration. But she had spent 52 years not leaving things where they were. How did? She stopped. "Never mind. I'm sorry." "ID," he said, simply without performance. Mosul, 2004. He pulled out the next chair. "I've had 20 years to make peace with it. Some guys had it considerably so." He said it the way you say some things you have said many times. Not dulled, exactly. Worn smooth. The sharp edges gone through use. Vivian looked at her own hands in the blue nitrile gloves. "I'm up, Vivian," she said. Jerome, he didn't extend the right hand, gestured with his chin instead. "Easy practice. You're new, first week." He nodded, looked at her briefly, a quick, assessing look, the look of someone filing information. "You're holding the ladle wrong." "I'm what?" "The big ladle, for the soup. You're gripping all the way up the handle. By end of day, that'll be your wrists problem, not your shoulders." He demonstrated the adjustment with an invisible ladle, subtle, a shift of maybe 3 inches down the handle. "Lower. Let it balance in your hand instead of fighting it." She stared at him. He went back to the chairs. And that was the entirety of the exchange. No recognition. His newspaper reading had apparently not included the coverage of a billionaire's wife and a wife, or he had seen it and filed it under not relevant said. You're holding the ladle wrong." She went back to the kitchen, adjusted her grip. Her wrist felt better within the hour. The weeks moved differently at the shelter. Vivienne had expected the 200 hours to feel like a sentence counted down minute by minute. Instead, they had a texture she couldn't name. Denser, somehow, more material, like the difference between walking on carpet and walking on actual ground. She'd not examined this too closely. Vivienne had built her life around not examining things that might lead somewhere inconvenient. But she felt it, the way you feel a change in elevation before you can see the landscape shift. Week 2, she arrived carrying a white bakery box, croissants from the place on Colorado Boulevard that charged $17 for a half dozen. set them on the kitchen counter, looked at Josephine with something that was attempting to be generosity and landing closer to performance. Josephine looked at the box, looked at Vivian. "Where's your apron?" "I just thought I'd bring 600 meals." "Apron, gloves." Josephine was already moving. "Put the bot in the back. The overnight staff will have something good in the morning." Vivienne picked up the box, put it in the back, tied on her apron. Week 3. She arrived 12 minutes early. Josephine did not acknowledge this, but the task she assigned Vivienne that morning was fractionally more complex than the previous weeks, requiring judgment rather than repetition, requiring her to read the pace of the line and adjust rather than simply execute. Vivienne understood this was a form of trust, did not say so, just did the work. Week 4. She called the court-appointed coordinator to ask whether good behavior could reduce the total hours. The coordinator said no. Vivian thanked her and hung up and sat in her apartment for a moment, looking at the wall, the color of old paper. Then she went back the next morning anyway. Something was shifting. She couldn't identify what exactly. It wasn't the dramatic inner awakening of movies. It was smaller and less comfortable, more like a tooth that has been loose for a long time, finally coming out. The gap it left was strange. She kept pressing her tongue against the space where something's used to be. Week 5. On a Thursday evening, she called Portia. Portia answered on the 4th ring, not the 1st, which would have been eager. Not the 5th, which would have been a statement. The 4th, the ring of someone who had decided to answer and was still deciding how. "Viv, I don't know how to be somewhere without knowing what I'm supposed to be there for." Vivian said it without preamble. Without the social scaffolding she normally erected around anything honest, just said it directly, which was new. Portia was quiet for a moment, not the practiced quiet of a woman calculating her next social move. Something more genuine, the quiet of someone sitting with what they've just heard. "Yeah," Portia said, finally. "I know that feeling, a pause that had something alive in it. I've been performing being your friend for a while," Portia said. "Not always. It was real for a long time. But somewhere in the last several years it became a role I'd gotten comfortable in, and I stopped checking whether the role was honest." She paused. "I think we both need to figure out who we actually are when we're not performing something." Vivienne looked out the window of her studio apartment, the parking structure across the street, ordinary and gray and asking nothing of her. "Okay," she said. "Okay," Portia said. "Not a plan, not a reconciliation with a schedule. Just two women deciding from a distance to try honesty instead of familiarity, which was, given 23 years of the alternative, a significant thing to decide." Week 7 arrived with rain and a surge at the shelter door, and Josephine tripping the soup order, and Vivienne spending 6 straight hours on her feet until her lower back announced its presence in language she could not ignore. She sat on the folding chair at the end of the counter during the lull between services. Jerome appeared nearby, sorting a donation of winter coats into bins, assessing each one, folding the keepers, setting the unsalvageable aside with the same sentimentality he brought to everything. He glanced at her. "You're back. It's fine. You're sitting like your spine is an argument you're losing." She almost said it's fine again. Stopped. "It hurts," she said instead. "Gets better. First 2 months, the bz's adjusting." He folded a jacket, set it in the keep bin. "You're asking it to do things it hasn't done. Give it time." She watched him work for a moment. "Jerome, carefully, can I ask you something?" "You can ask. After everything. What you went through. Did you ever feel angry at—" She searched, not for the polished word, for the actual one. "At the people who sent you there? At the country?" He was quiet, sorted 2 more items. "Sure," he said, "for a while. A coat, a assessment, the keep bin, but anger's expensive. Takes more energy to maintain than most people realize. And I needed that energy for other things." He looked at her then, direct, unhurried, the look of someone who has no investment in the impression he's making. "Why are you asking me that?" She looked at the floor. "I'm trying to understand," she said, "how a person can be treated bad by someone and then just keep going without burning the whole thing down." He thought about this seriously, set down the coat in his hands. Gave the question the respect of actual consideration. "Some people burn it down," he said. "Sometimes that's the right call. Depends on what needs to go." He picked the coat back up. "But most people who seem like they've made peace with something haven't made peace with it exactly. They've just decided that who they are is more important than what was done to them. Like, I don't get to stop being myself because someone acted badly. That's giving them too much of something that belongs to me." The shelter sounds continued around them, the kitchen, the voices, the specific acoustic of a large space full of people who have nowhere else to be right now. Someone in the news a while back, Vivian said, carefully. A general. Monroe, did you? Jerome stopped moving, not dramatically, just stopped, set down the coat. The particular stillness of someone who has just heard something unexpected land in a place they weren't guarding. He looked at her. Aldrich Monroe, he said. Not a question. She held his gaze. You know him, Jerome looked at her for a long moment. The look of a man doing real arithmetic about something that matters. Then he reached into his back pocket and took out his wallet. Old leather, worn at the corners and soft from years of handling. He opened it, took out a photograph, small, folded once across the middle, the kind of photograph that has been carried so long it has absorbed the warmth and texture of the person carrying it. He unfolded it, held it out. Two men in desert camouflage, standing in front of a military vehicle, bright flat light, both squinting into it, both grinning, the grin of peoples who are somewheres genuinely difficult and are managing it anyway. The younger of the two men was lean, late 20s, with the compressed energy of someone who moved fast when things required it. His arm was around Jerome's shoulders. Jerome pointed at the younger man with one finger of his left hand. He was a captain then, Jerome said. 2003. I was 22 years his senior in age. Didn't matter to him one way or another. He paused. When I was trying to get into the unit, my application kept getting passed over. Too old for the standard intake, one score borderline in a secondary assessment. Nobody wanted to make the exception. He folded the photograph carefully, returned it to its place in the wallet. Monroe read my full file. Wrote 4 pages to the review board explaining why the exception was warranted. Never asked him to. He just did it because he thought it was right. Vivienne sat with this. When the IED went off, Jerome continued, his voice the same, even, unhurried, facts delivered as facts. We were in a 3-vehicle convoy. Second vehicle took the blast directly. Monroe was in the third. It was out of the vehicle before the dust settled. Pulled 2 men out of the wreckage. He paused. I was one of them. Found out 2 days later that he'd cracked a rib during the extraction. Hadn't mentioned it. The coat donation bin sat between them, half sorted. I saw his name in the news, Jerome said. Read about the gala. He looked at her steadily. About a woman who poured wine on him. Vivienne did not move. Jerome looked at her. His expression did not change into anger, did not harden. He sat with the information the way he sat with most things, directly, without flinching, but also without drama. Vivienne, he said slowly. Hartwell. She met his eyes. Yes, he exhaled. Long and slow. The breath of someone absorbing something significant without performing the absorption. Then he looked at his hands, at the 3 remaining fingers on the right. The left hand that had learned to do what both hands used to do. He looked up. You holding the ladle better? He asked. She blinked. Yes. He nodded. Once. Then picked up the coat he'd set down and returned to sorting. Come back tomorrow, he said. That was all. No confrontation, no absolutions, no scene built around the revelation, just come back tomorrow, which was, and she understood this, somewhere below the level of language, a far harder thing to receive than anger would have been. Anger she knew how to manage. This she did not. She came back the next day, and the day after that. While Vivienne was learning how to hold a ladle, Desmond was learning how to look at a list. The list his assistant compiled had 37 names. People who had left Hartwell Defense Group in the past 7 years and cited, in some format, formal complaint, exit interview notation, a comment to a colleague that made it into a record somewhere, a discriminatory experience, or a hostile environment. Or the sense that no matter how well they performed, they were not going to be permitted to belong. 37 people. Desmond called all 37s himself. Not his assistant, not HR. Him, personally, from his desk, starting on a Monday morning in November and working through the list over the following 3 weeks. Some didn't answer. He left a voicemail and moved on. Some answered and had nothing to say to him. One man said simply, I don't have anything to say to a Hartwell, and hung up. And Desmond sat with the dial tone for a moment before calling the next number. Some answered and talked for an hour. One woman cried and then apologized for crying, and Desmond says, please don't apologize, and meant it. He listened, did not defend, did not explain, did not offer the context that would have made the company look better. Just listened and wrote things down, and at the end of every call, regardless of how it had gone, said, thank you for talking to me. Then he hired an external firm to conduct a full cultural audit. And when the audit was complete, thorough, damning in places, honest in all of them, he published the results. Publicly, without legal requirement, without PR guidance that would have softened the language or buried the specifics. His board pushed back. His lawyers identified significant exposure. His communications team spent an entire meeting explaining why this was not standard practice and was in fact unprecedented and was also probably not necessary. Desmond published it anyway, because Clifton had called him on a Sunday morning 3 weeks after the board meeting. They had talked for almost 2 hours. Clifton's voice on the phone had sounded different, older, somehow, than it had sounded in the boardroom, as though the boardroom had required him to hold something, and the phone allowed him to set it down. At the end of the 2 hours, Clifton said, "I built something with a good reputation and a bad one underneath it, and I kept the bad one because fixing it was harder than maintaining it, and I taught everyone around me that the reputation was the asset." A long pause. "It isn't, son. The people are the asset. I got that wrong for a long time." The published audit was Desmond's answer to that. It was also, he knew, the only path toward any future version of the company that could look at itself without flinching. Not the UAV contract that was gone, signed, and delivered to someone else, finished, but something else. Some clients, some trust, some version of Hartwell Defense Group that the next 37 people who walked through would not eventually appear on a list like this one. It was going to take years. He was prepared to spend them. In the 6th month after the gala, on a Thursday morning in April, General Aldrich Monroe testified before the Senate Armed Services Committee. He sat at the long table in the hearing room in full-dress uniforms and spoke without notes 24 minutes about what the Defense Innovations Unit had learned through its contractor review process, about the gap between what organizations said about their cultures and what those cultures demonstrably produced, about the cost, not the moral cost, though that was present throughout, but the operational, strategic, mission-critical cost of building defense infrastructure on a foundation that has excluded capable people for reasons unrelated to their capability. He did not name Vivian Hartwell, did not name the gala, did not name Hartwell Defense Group. He didn't need to. Every person in that room knew. The 7 federal agencies that would eventually adopt modified versions of his proposed assessment framework knew. The defense industry trade publications that ran transcripts of his testimony knew. He spoke about it as a structural problem.
Because it was.
One woman at one gala had not created 30 years of exclusionary institutional practice. She had walked into a room full of cameras and demonstrated, without intending to, without knowing she was doing it, exactly what decades of unchallenged organizational culture looked like when it finally ran out of private space to operate. Technical excellence is a threshold, Monroe told the committee. Every serious contractor we review meets a technical threshold. The question we have not been asking rigorously enough is, what kind of institution is delivering that excellence? What environment is it built in? Who gets to contribute to it and who is systematically excluded? Because the answers to those questions determine not just the culture of our contractor base, they determine the long-term capacity of that base to innovate, to retain talent, and to serve a military that is itself composed of every kind of American. He paused. We have been treating character and capability as separate assessments. They are not. We intend to treat them as one. The gavel came down. 17 agencies, new framework, beginning in the next fiscal year. Formal apology happened on a Wednesday morning in December, 9 weeks after the gala. Vivian stood on the steps of the federal courthouse in Los Angeles, her attorney beside her. A cluster of journalists in front, smaller than the crowd the original story had drawn, because the story had moved on, but cameras still present for the formal conclusion of something that had begun with considerable footage. She held one page. She had written it herself, 4 drafts. The first was defensive in ways she could identify clearly by the second draft. The second was too polished. The prose of someone who has hired a wordsmith. The third was accurate but bloodless, the statement of a person issuing a correction rather than a person reckoning with a wrong. The fourth she had written at 4 in the morning in the studio apartment on Cordova Street, at the kitchen table the size of a generous closet, with a cup of tea and no mirror and no audience. Just what happened, what she had done, what it was. She read it. On the evening of October 14th, she said, I publicly humiliated General Aldrich Monroe at a charity event in Los Angeles. I used language that was racist and dehumanizing. I did this because I had decided, without basis and without hesitation, that he did not belong in that room. I was wrong about that specific judgment and about the entire framework of thought that produced it. She did not look up from the page, not because she was ashamed to, though she was, but because the page was what she had actually written, and she wanted to say was what she has actually written, not a performed version of it. I spent the morning after this incident on media platforms defending my actions. That was also wrong. Not strategically wrong, morally wrong. I was attempting to protect a version of myself that did not deserve protection. A pause. I am not standing here today because a court required me to make this statement. I am standing here because General Monroe, the staff at that event, and the employees of Hartwell Defense Group, who experienced for years a culture that my behavior reflects. They deserve to hear me say it clearly, without qualification, and without the armor I have spent most of my adult life wearing. She folded the page. I'm sorry. She stepped back from the microphone. Monroe was not present. The response from his office received by her attorney 2 hours prior was 5 words. Noted. We'll watch what follows. Not warm, not cold, just accurate. Just, this is how accountability works, not in the saying, in what comes after the saying. That evening, driving herself back to the apartment on Cordova Street, her car, her keys, her route, no one to report to. Her phone rang on the passenger seat. She glanced at the screen. Clifton. She answered. I watch, he said. I know. A pause, not uncomfortable. You did well, he said. She didn't thank him. Sat with it instead. Drove, the Sea City moving at her window at a speed that felt, for the first time in weeks, manageable. Dad, she said it carefully. The word had become different in her mouth. Not the social title she had used for 26 years. Easy and habitual, but something with more weight to it. More intention. I've been thinking about what you said at the board meeting. About what you meant when you said protect the name. Tell me. You meant do good work, stand behind it, treat people well enough that the name actually means something. A pause, that's what you meant. Clifton was quiet for a moment. Yes, he said. That's what I meant, but that's not what you practiced. Another pause, longer, the pause of a man sitting with a true thing. No, he said. It wasn't. Not always. His voice had the quality it had on the phone 3 weeks after the board meeting, older. The voice of a man who has set something down. I practiced protecting the position, the standing, the appearance of being above reproach, which isn't the same as being above reproach. And I taught everyone around me to protect the appearance. He paused, including you. And I'm sorry for that, Vivienne. Some of what happened on that Friday night is on me. I need you to know that I know that. She stopped at a light on Colorado Boulevard, 79 years old. And the first time he had said that's on me about anything in her hearing. I'm going to keep going to the shelter, she said, after the hours are finished. I know, I don't have a plan beyond that. I don't know what comes after that, but I know how to do that. I know what the work is. That's enough, Clifton said. That's where you start. The light changed. She drove. 1 year after the gala, the shelter on Marengo Avenue on a Tuesday morning in mid-October, 7:26 a.m. Vivienne arrived early. She had been arriving early for months, long past the point where Josephine tracked her hours, long past the point where the court order had any operative meaning. She arrived early because the early shift was when the overnight guests were still present, when the shelter had a different quality, quieter, more tired, more honest somehow. And she had learned that she did her best work in that quality. She tied on the apron. It was different from the one she'd been handed the first day. That one had finally given up its last seam somewhere in month 4, and Josephine had replaced it without comment, handing Vivienne the new one the way you hand someone a tool they've earned the right to use. This one was darker, more warm already. It fit differently, not because it was a different size, but because she was. Jerome was already there. He usually was. He arrived before the first shift and stayed past the last one and had never explained this to anyone, and nobody had asked because in the shelter on Marengo Avenue, people understood that presence was its own kind of explanation. He was restocking the serving counter when she came in, glanced at her. Turned back to the work early, he said. Traffic was light. He made a sound that might have been acknowledgement, might have been amusement. It was difficult to tell with Jerome, which was part of what she had come to appreciate about him. He did not perform his reactions for anyone. Tyler, the college student, still earnest, still slightly painful to be around in the specific way that very sincere young people are, arrived at 7:50 and immediately knocked a stack of paper cups off the edge of the counter. Jerome handed him a broom without looking up from what he was doing. Same spot every Tuesday, he said. I know, Tyler said miserably. Know it faster next week. Vivienne turned towards the soup stations so Tyler wouldn't see her face. The morning service ran long. A cold front had pushed through overnight, and the line at the door was longer than usual. People arriving who hadn't come in weeks, wearing the particular expression of people who have held out as long as possible against needing something. Vivienne worked the soup line for 3 hours while about to break. Josephine appeared at her shoulder once briefly to adjust the pace of service. Faster on portions, keep the line moving, and Vivienne adjusted without being told twice. At 11:30, during the gap between services, Jerome was on a stool near the storage room door, hands around a cup of coffee, looking at nothing in particular with the expression of a man whose mind sounds to somewhere else entirely. Vivian pulled a chair over. Not the folding chair by the counter, a different one, a sturdier one she'd claimed months ago. Sat down. He looked back at his coffee. They sat in the silence that develops between people who have shared enough space that silence no longer requires filling or explaining. After a while, Jerome reached into his back pocket, took out the wallet, took out the photograph, unfolded it with the care of long habit, and looked at it for a moment. Not showing her, just looking. She had seen him do this before. She didn't comment. She had learned over months of this that some things were not for the contrary. He's a 4-star now, Jerome said. I know. I read about it. Promotion came through after the committee hearings. He looked at the photograph a moment longer. He could have made it personal. What your wife did to me. Used the attention to settle a score. There would have been people who'd have supported that. He folded the photographs carefully, returned it. He didn't. He used it to change the frame. Took something that was done to him and pointed it at the system instead of the person. He paused. That takes a particular kind of discipline and a particular kind of faith that the system was worth fixing. Vivienne was quiet. Jerome looked at her. You going to ask me something? I've been trying to figure out how to ask it for a while. Take your time. She looked at her hands. The hands that had held a wine glass on a Friday evening in October and made a decision in a fraction of a second that had taken a year to begin to understand. The hands that now moved through 600 portions of soup without thinking about the motion. Do you think people can actually change? She said. Not perform changing. Not say the right things in front of the right cameras. Actually change. The part underneath. Jerome turned the question over. She could see him doing it, not performing consideration, actually considering. I think the underneath changes slowly, he said. And I think most people who claim to have changed the surface and left the structure alone. The underneath only shifts when you stop protecting it. But you let it be uncomfortable enough that it has to move. He looked at her. The question I'd ask isn't whether people can change. It's whether they're willing to stay in the discomfort long enough for it to happen. She thought about the napkins, about Eduardo and the champagne, about Miriam Okoffer in the 3rd floor, about how each of those moments had felt the time like breathing, automatic, unexamined, just the way things were. I think mine is moving, she said, the underneath. Slowly. Slowly is right, Jerome said. Fast change is usually shallow change, a pause. You know what tells me it's actually moving? He said. What? You stop defending yourself. He looked at her directly. First month you were here, every time something got uncomfortable, you started to explain, to contextualize. The impulse was right there. I could see it. You'd catch it and stop, but it was there. He took a sip of his coffee. Last few months, I don't see the impulse anymore, or I see it considerably less. He set the cup down. That's not surface. That's underneath. She sat with this. The shelter continued around them, the kitchen, the voices, the specific sound of a large space that was doing exactly what it was built to do. Jerome, she said it carefully. Can I ask you something else? You can ask. Do you? She stopped. Recognized the question she was about to ask. Recognized that it was still at its core about her own resolution, about whether she got to feel like this was finished. Never mind, she said. I was going to ask something that was still about me feeling better. I don't think that's the question. Jerome looked at her for a moment. Something shifted in his expression, barely perceptible. The shift of someone recalibrating a prior assessment by 1 degree. No, he said. It's not. They sat in the silence for another minute. Then Josephine appeared in the doorway. Dinner service in 40 minutes. I need 2 people on the bread station. Jerome stood, looked at Vivienne. You take bread. I'll do the counter. I've got it. He walked back into the kitchen. Vivienne sat for one more moment. The chair beneath her, the worn linoleum floor, the whiteboard on the wall across the room. Today's message in Josephine's careful handwriting. Whatever you brought in with you today, you can set it down while you're here. She read it, stood up, tied her apron tighter, and went to the bread station. Later, much later, after the dinner service and the cleanup and the walk to her car in the shelter's small parking lot, she sat in the driver's seat with the engine off for a moment, not falling apart, not having a realization, just sitting. The ordinary act of a person at the end of an ordinary working day, in a car that was hers and a life that was smaller than it had been and more honest than it had ever been. She picked up her phone, looked at it for a moment, called Clifton. He answered on the second ring. Viv, yeah, Dad. A pause. I've been thinking about what you said, about what you meant the name to stand for. And I think I'm starting to understand it. She looked through the windshield at the shelter building. The lights still on, the overnight shift beginning, the work continuing past the point where she was part of it. Not all of it, but the beginning of it. Tell me, Clifton said. So she did. She talked, and he listens, and the city moved around her in the way cities move, continuous and indifferent, and somehow tonight, not hostile. Just there. Just ongoing. Just the place where things happen to people who are trying to figure out what to do next. She talked for a long time, and Clifton, 79 years old, who had built something and gotten part of it wrong and had finally found that for that wrongness, listens the way old Mrs. and Sin stopped needing to respond and started needing to hear. When she finished, there was a pause. That's it, Clifton said quietly. That's what I meant. That's exactly what I meant. She didn't say anything, didn't need to. Outside, through the windshield, the lights of the shelter on Marengo Avenue were steady and warm against the October dark. She started the engine, drove home. Some stories end with justice. Clean, zizzable, the scales balanced in a way you can point to. Some end with redemption, the transformation complete. Before and after laid side by side. This one ends with a phone call in a parking lot. A woman and the man who helped make her, both of them trying, late, imperfectly, without a script, to understand what they had built together and what it had cost. That's it. That's the ending. Not a verdict, not a transformation, declared complete. Just two people on the phone in October, 1 year after a wine glass tipped, and a life reorganized itself around the absence of everything that had seemed permanent. A good name isn't declared. It isn't inherited. It is built slowly in the rooms where no one important is watching, in the daily, unremarkable choice to treat the person in front of you as someone whose dignity doesn't depend on what they can do for you. Vivian Hartwell spent 52 years wearing a name like armor. It took losing everything she thought it meant to begin understanding what it actually was. Not finished, just pointed in the right direction, which is, sometimes, the only ending honest stories get.